Science were there. I know it. Well, I don't know it. Mm-hmm. I wasn't there. So I wish I could say, yes, I know it. Well, I have a feeling there were probably very tall people there because there's just too much, scuttlebutt about it.
Right.
But that's just me. Again, all this stuff is fascinating, but everybody has to do their own work and discern on their own. And
right. And I think that's one of those things that that we all come to our conclusions based on our own evidence, and you can see that happening all the time. I mean, there's very, very few laws in science, right? The theory of evolution is still a theory, although lots of people.
Oh no, there's all kinds of physical laws in science.
No, but
there's all kinds of.
No, I understand, but what I'm saying is that in comparison to what we believe, and there being actual scientific laws, it's a very. I'll give it to you this way. I'm probably saying it and presenting it in the wrong way because sometimes I do that. But
yeah, and I'm super paranoid. I don't want to ever step into someone else's territory that I'm not an expert in. So I'm always putting the brakes on, like I don't know.
Oh well, no, I'll take the heat. If people want to say Kevin doesn't know what he's talking about, guess what? Get in line. But what
pretty good.
Yeah. Well, what I'm saying is that my dad told me a story when he was in medical school, and I found it really apropos in the fact that he said that when he was in a lecture one time, and he said, "Well, we're gonna teach you this about these different medical procedures and things like that," and he said, "Well, you have to realize that." 20 years from now, 50% of what I'm teaching you is no longer going to be true, and that's
smart man.
Exactly. I mean, that's the part that I think a lot of people don't take that into effect, and to say,
they need to just sit back and wait, sit back and watch. It'll all come around.
Yeah. Well, and I think that this is one of those things where and a lot of people like to poo-poo the idea of the ancient peoples having technologies that maybe we've lost and things like that, and the whole idea of but they've never journeyed to the places and stood next to those stones. When you read the account of just a normal guy who goes down to Peru or wherever and stands next to those giant, 150, 200 ton stones and sees how they're fitted together like puzzle work with, no space in between. He stands there and he ponders, how the hell did they stack these things on top of each other? It's like, we're missing something, obviously. So, science hasn't been able to say what they did, so that means it didn't happen. But then again, you have your own logic and reasoning. If you have your own brain, you can pretty much say, wow, they knew something. Something happened here besides dragging these things across the ground. There's no way. Well, it's interesting. I've got an interesting story about Peru. It has to do with my mom, actually. It's kind of an interesting thing. She said I could tell this story. If you got a minute.
Me?
Yeah.
Do we have a minute? I don't know. What time is it?
We have.
Okay, you go then.
We have a lot of time. I thought you just wanted to.
Oh no! I love your story.
My story about my mom again. But anyway, no, they went to Peru, and they were very, very interested in all the different locations. And one of the things that was interesting was the people that they went from were very close members of the family, and they were both anthropologists from the Everett area in Western Washington. And so they really wanted to go to this one location. I guess it's not that well traveled, the tourist trade, but a lot of the native people still go there. and they found out about it, and I think it's called the Valley of the Condor or something like that. I'm not sure exactly what it is in Peruvian, or what the Incan words for it would be. But my mom is one of those people who's just always had strange experiences her whole life, seeing ghosts, and
she's Irish.
Well, yeah, and she used to take me up to see, the fairy tree and all these other things, and so she
yeah, mine too.
And so she was just always up for it, and she's had very strange premonitions and things like that.
Yeah.
But and it just comes naturally to her. So they went to this location, and it was funny because the man that she was with, he's passed away now, but his name was David, and David was telling the whole story of the ethnographic nature of the place and all these different things that happened, and this is what the people had reported happening and everything. So you're supposed to stand on the middle of this promontory over this valley. You look over this valley, and so they were standing there, and she was standing next to the guide Luis, who was there with them, and so and she said to Luis, "What am I supposed to do?" And he said, "Well, you just stand there, and if anything, if anything happens, it happens, And so she started to feel like her arms lifted up, and and she's like they were flapping, and she started to feel like she was levitating off the ground, and Luis grabbed her by the arm and grabbed her back down, and she felt like she asked for protected over this valley, and so, and
that's what spots of the swans do, though.
Yeah.
They just send you instantly. It's weird stuff happens to you in them.
But what was
that was a sacred site, right?
Yeah,
it was the Valley of the Condor, which is most likely right underneath Cygnus.
Yep.
Which is clearly a sacred site if it's underneath Cygnus.
And I said to my mom, I said, "Did you really feel like you levitated?" And she said, "Yeah, I absolutely felt like it." Luis said that he'd never seen anybody that was a non-native react that way, and everything else. Well, the thing about it was that she was all happy that she'd experienced this. I mean, she was overjoyed with it. And you can make the thing, well, that didn't really happen, and she was just making up in her mind. Well, the truth of the matter is that David, who was there, had tried it before she did, and nothing had happened. And he was watching my mom, and he was so angry that he learned all these different stories, and this is what was supposed to happen, and it happened to my mom, that he wouldn't talk to her for the rest of the day. He was literally yeah.
And that's how it works. It's very random. I mean, David could return, and when he least expects it, something will happen. I mean, that's what happens with groups of people that go out. One person goes, "Did you see that?" And everybody goes, "No." Yeah. But then there's times where everybody sees it or has something happen. Right. It's random. It's there's no way you can control. It doesn't perform at the circus. That's the best way I can put it.
And I think the purpose of the story is for that, because of the fact that you can research these things your whole life, and so the follow up to that story is that he didn't talk to my mom for all the rest of the day, and then the next day he woke up at 5 o'clock in the morning because they were going to leave to go somewhere else, and he woke up my dad, and he said to my dad, we're going to go out there, we're going back out there. And so he got a taxi, and they were driving across Cusco and everything like that to get to this location, and they had to do it before a certain time or something, and he got out there, and he said it happened to him whenever he went out there. But and I said to my dad, "Well, do you think it happened to him?" He goes, "Well, I think probably had hypoxia or something because of the high altitude and everything. But he thought it happened, so that was one of the. I mean, but
hypoxia is really good for inducing altered states.
Yeah, exactly.
Yay, hypoxia.
But
it's funny.
But the thing about it is that's interesting is that it doesn't always work out exactly the way that you want it to, and sometimes you have to be very careful of that. And so people sometimes they big up stories too on the internet, and then they put it on there and that I've got this and this did this, and and then you sort of talk to the people sometimes, and they sort of say, well, it wasn't exactly like that, but then people judge these other people as being more special than them, and that really just almost destroys me, because nobody's more special than anybody else. You can just be more in tune to it, and your experiences are your experiences, and you learn from it, but that doesn't make you more or less of a person. And I think people judge themselves by other people's experiences.
Yeah, I think people try to make people feel less than them by the way they present some of their experiences. But yeah, it's a universal phenomenon that all human beings are able to achieve or are vulnerable to, or however you want to word it. But it's a very human experience. But again, if some people are more in their intellectual brain, like when I'm taking care of my 90-year-old mother, I'm appointments, rules, schedules, time frames. I don't have experiences, and it's really hard for me to alter myself. When you're more in your left brain, you just don't slip into a visionary state very easily. Some people are naturally gifted and are just always slipping into visionary states. Other times, like in my experience, it's a skill that I cultivated and trained for, and then I'll be in a spot of the fawn and I'll involuntarily slip into one. Mm-hmm. So there's all kinds of variations and versions. We're all unique.
Yeah.
But anyone can achieve it. We all have the same hardware.
Right. And so, and you were talking about sonic driving before, and so that's
drumming and percussion. Yes.
Okay. So
that affects the right brain component, right? Mm-hmm. Like we were talking about the MRI, where the right side of the brain will fire up.
Right.
And that's one of the easiest, most common ways to induce an altered state. It's drumming, and most people don't know what the drum is really used for. It's a tool.
Right.
It's a tool to put someone into an altered state. That is what its sole purpose is. Besides, if you're in a rock and roll band or something, but in ancient times, that was its sole purpose, was to induce an altered state where you could perceive what was normally unseen. And it opens up a pathway. Siberian people call it the spirit horse. They ride that pathway into the spiritual world on the tone of the drum. It is the vibration in between beats. When you're beating a drum, it does begin to vibrate consistently, right? So you're do, but there's a ooh that's going behind it, the vibration. Mm-hmm. And that tone is what you follow. That is the pathway. And that is what people don't understand about the drum. You have to keep that constant sonic driving going to open that pathway that your consciousness can follow, so it will slip into an altered state.
Well, I noticed that and you have different drums that you use for different types of things. Is that normal?
Yeah, I do. Well, that's part of my methodology, my tradition. I'll use a drum for, again, science people, plug your ears. I'll use one drum for removing what I call asekis, which are energy, bad thoughts that you can send into someone, like if you throw a dart at someone. Mm-hmm. You can throw a bad thought at someone in my realm, my world view, and that will then become an illness later.
Right.
If not removed. So you remove the spiritual darts, and then illness doesn't grow afterward. So I use drums to remove those. I have a specific